Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. You are most welcome here. I live in a coastal New England town, and this winter I had fun taking pictures of boats. The boats were out of the water for the winter, so mostly I was taking pictures of their hulls, which you don't always see because they're underwater. There was one boat in particular that I really liked. I felt inspired to create something for my home from this boat. And I decided that I would make a pillowcase. Partly, you'll see why, because of what on the boat inspired me, and partly because I love pillowcases as decor pieces. They're relatively inexpensive to make, and you can change the look of an entire room by changing out the pillowcases. So I'm looking forward to figuring out exactly what sort of pillow covering I want to make based on this boat. Let's go have some fun. This is the boat that I was inspired by, and I do love the hull of the boat, but it was these fenders in particular, those white, soft things that really inspired me. So the pillow that I'm going to make a covering for is this 18 by 18 inch pillow. And I think it's a really great idea to buy some inserts like this that you can then make pillow coverings for. This is some heavyweight white upholstery fabric, sort of a cotton duck that I bought to recover a chair, and I have a lot of it. And then these little, I guess, swatches are from the Dollar Tree, and they're 18 inches by 21 inches. They actually vary a bit in how big they actually are. And this I found among my fabric pieces, and nobody in my family wanted to claim it, and I just loved the color. So after I've ironed the fabric, what I'm going to do is cut some strips. So because I want to cover an 18 by 18 inch pillow, I'm going to do 19 inches by 2 inches for the strips. And I'm going to cut 2 of those, and then I'm going to cut a third one, which is 19 inches by 3 inches. And what I'm going to do with these is make something that looks sort of like those fenders on the boat. And I thought for a long time about how to recreate those in pillow form. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew a seam along these, and so I find it's easier to sew a seam if you iron something first. That's my advice to anybody who is learning to sew, is that if you iron things before you sew them, it will make sewing so much easier, and quite often you won't need to pin if it's ironed really well. So we're going to iron these lightly because we really don't want a crease. And then sew, I think I did about a 1/4 inch seam, like the smallest seam you can. Because in thinking about how to do this, I decided that one long tube would work best. But who wants to turn a long tube of fabric? Nobody. That's no fun. And since this is a pillow, and the seam's going to be on the back of the pillow, or it won't be visible, not really on the back of the pillow. It'll be on the front of the pillow, but it will be on the back. So I thought, we really don't have to turn these, but we do want to keep that seam pretty small. So what you're going to do is sew that 1/4 inch seam, and so you're going to have the right side out because we're not going to turn it. Now, once you have that seam sewn, we're going to iron again just to get rid of any crease that might be there. And then we're going to stuff these with fiberfill. And you don't have to stuff them really, really full, because what we're going to do is tie them off. So just stuff it lightly with fiberfill. And I found this was easiest if I used either a long thin knitting needle or a skewer, bamboo skewer, to stuff the fiberfill down. Okay, so I have 3 tubes here. One that I made from the 3-inch wide strip of fabric, and 2 that I made from the 2-inch wide strips of fabric. And here is where I diverge from my original vision, because I have this just yarn from the Dollar Tree in the color denim, and I love this yarn. I love the color. I think it's a beautiful color for a coastal or a nautical craft. Wasn't what I intended to do here, but what I decided to do was a technique called whipping. And I used this technique in another video, and that one was doing nautical candles, and I will link that here. But basically what we're going to do is I cut an 18-inch length of that yarn, and right in the middle of this tube, I did tie it with some thread first. You really don't need to do that. I didn't do it after the first one. We're going to whip, and we're going to do that every 3 inches or so down the tube. So to whip, you make a loop, a short loop, maybe 1.5 inches. With your yarn, you lay it against the tube, and then you begin wrapping the yarn around the tube and around your loop that you've made. After about 3 wraps, just tug on the loop so that the yarn where you started the wrap just tightens up a little bit. Then continue your wrap until it's about twice the width of your tube. Take the end, put it through a loop. With the other end, pull so that that loop ends up under the whipping, and then you can pull on both ends to tighten the whole thing, and then trim the ends off. So we'll do that again about every 3 inches down this larger tube. Once I finished with the larger tube, I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do with the smaller ones. I knew I wanted them on either side. So I looked at a few different materials. I have this Just Yarn tweed, and the color is grayish tweed, which I think is a hilarious name. And that was the color I ended up liking the best. I also considered using white. There's a just cotton, using white yarn, using jute, which might feel like it goes better with the nautical theme, but I just didn't like the color as much as I liked this grayish tweed. So I ended up using both of these colors and doing more whipping all the way down both of these smaller tubes. And what I found here was to do this as a sort of assembly line made it go very quickly. So I marked the tube, and then I cut all of the pieces, and then I whipped them, but without doing all the tightening and pulling, and then I did the tightening and pulling, and then I trimmed them off. I didn't start that way, and you'll see that my 2 tubes aren't really that symmetrical. So I would say maybe practice, if you're going to do this, to get a rhythm so that you're consistent, because even though my pieces of yarn were all the same length, they were all about 18 inches. I might have gone a little bit shorter for these. I still wasn't that consistent with the width of my whipping. Okay, and now that we have these, we have our tubes, we have them whipped. The middle one, I guess, looks a little bit like a fender. The outer ones don't at all, or several fenders maybe strung together. Now what? So I just took them and sort of played around with different colors of the fabric over the pillow and different configurations of the tubes and maybe some of the nautical rope. That one I happened to get at the Dollar Tree, but you can buy that anywhere. And I think there are a lot of variations. here. A lot of possibilities. You know, what I'm doing right here, not that, just the middle one, the fendery one, and the nautical rope, I think I like better than what I'm looking at right there. Here's my hope for you. My hope for you is that you look at what I'm doing right here and you think, I can do a lot better, because you probably can, and that you'll come up with something that is better than this and that you love. Looking at what I'm doing right here, I think I can see ways that I could have made this pillow that I would have liked it better. But that's roughly what I ended up doing. Now, I also had this other fabric, which I really love, and I thought about using that, but I felt like it looks more like your grandfather's madras shirt than something that goes with this pillow. So eventually I decided not to use that. And then there are these other colors, which I really think are beautiful, but I couldn't quite figure out how to make them work with this pillow. So I kept it pretty simple in the configuration that you can see right there. And I just sewed them down from the back, hand sewed them to the pillow. Well, to the fabric that's going to become the pillow cover. Before I did that, I sewed them together though, just to make them easier to sew to the pillow. I cut all the pillow pieces out, and basically I just have 19 by 19 inch piece of fabric for the front. And then for the back, I just did something really simple. I just cut 2 panels so that it could fold over, you know, so you have a slot, basically the width of the pillow in the back, that you can stuff the pillow into. And I'll say that cutting with this rotary cutting wheel and having a grid and that plastic, I don't know what to call it, I don't know what the name of it is, but that big plastic rulery thing has really changed my life. I used to cut entirely with scissors, and cutting makes a big difference in sewing. If you can, like, so first before I start cutting, I square off the fabric, and then I cut it really precisely, and it just makes a really big difference. So if you're a sort of a beginner sewer like I am, and it's not that I'm a beginner sewer, I've been sewing for decades, I just haven't been sewing well for decades, and it's really nice to have the right tools, and it does make a big difference. So I cut all the pieces, and actually now that I think of it, what I did, it was 2 days ago, so I guess I've forgotten. What I did was, after I had sewn the tubes together by hand, I sewed them to the pillow, top and bottom, so that they were affixed to the middle of the pillow properly. But then, you know, of course you could slip your hand between them and the pillow. Then I sewed them down to the pillow, and then I sewed the pillow together. So then I just sewed the back pieces of the pillow, of course right sides down, to the pillow front. And always exciting, the moment of truth where we turn the pillow. And what I discovered is, you can see there at the top, I hadn't lined it up very well. So what I did was I repaired that just with a little bit of hand stitching, and that was easy to fix. But I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with it at that point. So just stuff that pillow in there and get an idea how it's going to look. I felt it looked just unfinished. So what I decided to do was to use that nautical rope again and just border it all the way around the pillow. And so I stitched it on by hand, and then what I decided to do was tie a square knot at the top, whip the ends of the rope, and so it's got sort of a square knot sitting on the top with the rope sort of a double width of the rope a little bit where there was a little extra rope, but I just evened that off at the top. But I do think the rope around the pillow makes it look more finished. And to tie a square knot, you take the right side, let's say, and you go over and then under, and then now that piece is on the left, and bring it over and then under on the other side to make a square knot. Okay, and we'll look at that one at the end, but again, that was not my original vision. My original vision was to make a pillow entirely out of these fender-looking tubes. And I realized that what I really should have done was stuffed and tied it at the same time. I had never intended to whip the rope. I had always intended to tie it. And I wanted them not to line up. So those little sausages are 3 inches long. Well, I want the next one to be tied right in the middle of that. So again, 3 inches long, but offset from that one. So what you do is, after you've sewn your strips, tie right in the middle and then stuff down to the middle for your 3 inches, and then tie it off, and then stuff down to that one, and then tie it off. And I'm using this just cotton from the Dollar Tree. It's basically just string. It's not even very easy to work with string, so if you have better string than this, just use any old string. I guess I'd just say that thread might not be the best for this unless it's very strong thread. Let's see, tie it, and try to make sure that when you tie it, you're tying on that back seam so that the little ends, we're going to cut them as close as we can, but we want those little ends all along the back seam because that's where it's going to attach to the pillow. So I made, I think, 9 of those, and I did the 3-inch widths. So 9 of those, the 3-inch widths, and then tied every 3 inches. And now with that done, here's the sort of plan. So I didn't do enough to do an entire pillow front, but I thought that really might be too much. I have this denim-y looking fabric, which is also another one of those swatches from the Dollar Tree. I think a very beautiful color too. And so, full disclosure, and learn a lesson from me. I had trouble sewing these on straight. I was trying to sew them from the back so that you wouldn't be able to see the stitches, and it was just very hard to keep the fabric from bunching. So what I ended up doing is using a little bit of hot glue, and it was much easier to line them up straight using the hot glue because I've got the guidelines from my board behind me, and I can also use my ruler as a guide. And so this way I'm able to get them on quite straight and exactly where I want them. Now here's the problem. I didn't just glue them on. This was just sort of a temporary way to hold them on so that I could then sew them. So I did then flip it over and stitch them all on in a way that wouldn't be visible. The problem came when I went to sew it with the sewing machine. The glue was too close to the end, and it really messed up my sewing machine needle. Sewing machine needles, at least mine, do not like going through hot glue. So if you are going to do this, I would say either don't use hot glue, maybe use fabric glue, or just make sure you don't go all the way to the edge, like I'm going pretty close to the edge, so that your sewing machine needle doesn't go through them. What I ended up doing because of that problem was sewing most of this pillow together by hand. That is also difficult. Regular needles don't like going through hot glue either, and I had to use a thimble. There were a few injuries because of how hard it is to push the needle through the hot glue. So just, if you do use this method that I used, don't put the glue where you're going to be sewing, or use a different glue. Or maybe you're better at sewing than I am, you probably are, and maybe you don't need to use the glue at all. So in addition to the little faux fender things, I thought a little bit of the nautical rope would look nice here too, just as a sort of a contrast. Same thing, I glued it too close to the end, right to the end, but that really helped me hold it in place, and just like with the bumpers, I stitched that on from the back. So now that I have the thing and it's all stitched together, I'm intimidated. I am, because I have trouble with my sewing machine with thick things. But I also know that I need something on the edge, so I'm about to make it even thicker. So I have this piping, which is 3/8 inch, or you might call it welt. And I had bought this again for upholstery projects, one that I'm too intimidated to handle right now, but I have another piece of that same denim-y looking fabric, and what I'm going to do is sew a welt or piping to go all the way around. And this pillow, it's about 18 inches by 18 inches. I really didn't have enough fabric. Those swatches or squares from the Dollar Tree, they're 18 by 21, so I wasn't able to do a 19 by 19. This does end up being big enough to fit my pillow, but it's 18 by 18, so I cut a little bit more than I needed, about, I'd say 6 inches more than I needed of this piping, and then I cut strips of the denim fabric. Now, I cut 3-inch strips because I really wanted the little tails to be long enough for me to sew to this. So I didn't want to have a short little tail when I wrapped it around my piping. So I cut 3-inch strips and then I sewed them together. I don't really know what the appropriate way to do this is, but whenever I look at welting, it's got a sort of diagonal seam to it. So I put my strips at right angles to each other and sewed a diagonal seam so that I had diagonal seams on the strips. And then I had one long strip of fabric, and then I wrapped it around the welt. I switched the foot on my sewing machine, which is pretty easy on my sewing machine. There's a little button on the back of the foot that you just lift up and it drops the old foot off and it allows you to push the new foot on. So I switched to a foot that would allow me to sew right up next to the welt. And then I started to use the sewing machine to sew that around the pillow, but it got stuck on the hot glue, as I mentioned before. So I ended up sewing that welt on by hand. Then I stitched up the pieces for the back of the pillow, and I used that Your Grandfather's Madras shirt fabric that I liked from before as the back. And again, the pieces were really small. These were even smaller than the denim fabric, a little bit smaller than 18 by 21. So the back of this pillow is a little tight, but I did the same sort of just fold opening on the back of this pillow as I did for the other one. And here's the first pillow, the one that was a little bit of a side trip, and I think it looks okay from a distance. I actually think it's kind of interesting, but it's not really what I had intended to make. And here's the second one. This is more what I had in mind, but actually not exactly. Again, I had thought more to cover the entire pillow, and I think I had thought to have them vertical. So who knows, maybe in the future I will figure out a different kind of pillow to make from my original inspiration. So what did you think of our nautical pillows? I really hope that it inspired you to create something. I confess that my favorite is the one that comes closer to my original vision, but I really did have fun sort of veering off in this direction. If you have a favorite between these two pillows, please tell me down in the comments, and I'd really love to know if you did something different, if you were maybe inspired by this craft to create a pillow cover of your own, but you went in a different direction. I would love to hear about it. If you liked this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you enjoy this sort of content, please consider subscribing to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.